Hey guys, welcome to People I Think Are Cool. I'm your host, Liz Reed, one part of the art duo Cuddles and Rage, also co-creator of the horror graphic novel Bites of Terror. And this is my podcast to interview cool, interesting, creative people. Today on the show, we have Russell Nohelty. He is a man of many talents. I first discovered his work through his podcast, The Complete Creative, which the episodes are still up, but he has ended, and we talk about the podcast a lot. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk to Russell is because he is super successful at self-publishing. And as a writer myself, I believe in the hybrid career of being traditionally published and then also continuing to self-publish your own work. Because why not? You want to get stuff out there and you don't want the world to tell you to stop working, because it's all about feeding your creativity. Russell is full of great advice, so you'll want to have your pen and paper ready. And go check out the show notes. I'll have all the links to his website, podcast, social media, his books. And guys, enjoy the show with Russell.
I think you're neat. I think you're sweet. I think you're creepy. I think you need me. The meaning of life. You don't go that deep. I think you're cool. I think you're cool. Let's be cool together.
Sure. So I am Russell Nohelty. I'm a USA Today bestselling author. I am an editor, an author, a publisher at a company called Wannabe Press. And I also had a little podcast called The Complete Creative that went 200 episodes.
Which is how I found you, was through your podcast. And I'm a little sad that you stopped. But my very first question that I wanted to ask you is, I think a lot of creative people don't know when to stop something. And so I find it really interesting with this podcast that it was very successful, that you already knew when you were going to stop it and that you were able to actually stop it. So I'm just wondering, what was that like for you to follow through there? Because I have a hard time saying goodbye to projects, and I know others do too.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the hardest questions as a creative, because you never want to let something go. There's a thing called the sunk cost fallacy, where once you're in, or when you're in a hand at poker, and you just keep saying, well, I've already put in $2,000, so I should just keep going in and in and in. So one of the things I think that really separates a successful creative is the ability to quit. And this idea that winners never quit is complete dookie. The more successful people are, the more they quit. They quit everything. They quit everything that doesn't service them. They quit, and some things they'll keep going just because they love the idea of doing it. But successful people are the best quitters that I know. And the more successful you are, the better you have to be at quitting, because you only have so many hours in a day. We're all only gifted the same 24 hours. So the first thing that I look for is, do I still have a light? It's a spark to want to do this. That often for me comes with an audience. There's sort of a reciprocal, is the audience still growing? Are there still people out there listening, or is it falling off? The problem with the podcast was, from the time we relaunched it a year ago to when it closed, we lost about half of our audience. And so we were actually losing people week after week after week. And part of that was pandemic. Part of that was I'm a person that doesn't like to keep the same format every week, or do the exact same thing, or talk to the same kind of guests. And so there was some of that. But at the end of it, we were talking to it fell under the threshold where it made sense for me to continue, just to continue it. And I hate continuing things just to continue it. So the number one thing that I will say is, once you lose a spark for something, you should find a way to stop doing it. Mm-hmm. This also goes to the idea of writer's block. You're a writer, I'm a writer. People always say, there's no such thing as writer's block, or, just push through writer's block. And I have found writer's block is almost always a result of me not wanting to work on the project anymore. Me intuitively knowing that I shouldn't continue going, or I don't have a way out of this situation. Now, there are some writer's blocks that are good, where you've written yourself into such a corner that like it takes you time to get out of it, and you have to think your way out, and it's really hard. And that's not the writer's block I'm talking about. I'm talking about the writer's block where like you just can't seem to get motivated to do a project. And that's when I asked myself, should I even be working on this? This one time I worked on this book of 10,000 words, and I got to 10,000 words in this book, and I was like, I hate this. I just don't like it. It's like, no one's going to know if I finish this but me. And so I shelved it. And that book actually became a short story later called The Last Death of Oscar Hernandez. That's in this really successful anthology with Jim Butcher called Parallel Worlds. And it's so just because you end something doesn't mean that it won't come back. So the first thing that I look for is, do I have a fire for this still? The second thing I ask myself is, like, is there an audience for this? Because that's the other half of the equation. You only get 24 hours in a day. You can only work on so many projects at once. And there has to be somebody there to buy it at the end of the day, or I have to be so lit up to do it that I don't care if there's an audience that there's an audience for it or not.
Yeah.
And hopefully both. Like, I am looking at this point in my career for the projects that are both, that have the potential for a big audience and that I light up to do. I have these 3 questions that I'm going to butcher now, but they're in my book, How to Build Your Creative Career, about when to stop a project. And or when to take on a new project, and or how to say no to a project. I think it's actually called How to Say No to a Project. Oh, I'm butchering my own book. Sorry.
You've written so many. It's okay.
So so when I have a full slate of books, of projects, I always and I want to take on something new. I always ask myself, is this better than anything I have going on now? Does this satisfy something that I want to do in the future? And if both of them are true, am I willing to spend my free time doing it? And then the fourth one that I've thought about recently, I don't have in the book, is, am I willing to replace any project I'm working on now with this project? And that becomes really easy at the beginning of your career, when you don't have hits, when you you may not even be making really good work yet. But over time, like, you're going to get better and better and better and better and better and better and better projects. And then you have to be like, oh, well, no, I love the 4 projects I'm working on so much, and I don't have another opening for the next year. So what do I do? And I find that's as important a question to ask than like, how do you end a project? Because the real answer is, the minute the fire stops burning for that project, like, you should just cancel it. You should quit it. You should quit. If you're in the middle of a series, find the next end point that you can get out on. If you are in the middle of drafting a book that doesn't have an editor or publisher, like, just stop doing it and come back when the fire's lit. And come back when you're fresh, because the truth is, no project is ever dead. I am launching a project right now that has been sitting in my hard drive for 5 years. It just done, but it was not lettered and it was not book designed. And I just launched it today, a couple of days ago. So these things are never dead. You can always come back to them. You can always revisit them. You can always take a core concept from something and put it into better book. This is one of my favorite things to do. So now I have these projects that I'm working on and I love, and I want to keep going for a while. And I say, okay, cool. That's a really cool idea. You can either wait 3 years until you have an opening for this book, or find a way to take this idea and put it in one of the books that you're already writing. And so that's another thing, is you can just cannibalize mediocre or even good ideas for great ideas.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And even though a podcast ends, it kind of lives on forever. There are so many podcasts where I just look up a subject and then I realize the podcast ended 3 years ago, but I'm like, oh, I'll go through the archive anyways. So I feel like people can still discover your podcast even though it's ended. That's totally not the point, but the beauty about your podcast that attracted me to it is that you talk to creatives and then you also put in the business side. But whenever I look up creative business, I always want to vomit halfway through a podcast because they're so like jazzy. They're like, "Did you put your income up last month?" Or it's just it feels like everybody's like, is it Tony Robbins? Yes, they want to be their own Tony Robbins, and it makes me want to vomit. But with your podcast, it's so genuine, and it's just as much about the art as it is about getting people to see your art and to pay for it. Was that always your approach, or is that just something that's innate within you?
I think so. I originally the podcast was originally called The Business of Art when I launched in 2016, and it was the inward idea was I want to talk with successful creatives, steal all of their best ideas, and then implement them. Not like the best, but like what they've done in their career to make themselves successful, like not their actual IP or anything like that, but like, how to do shows, how to run Kickstarters, how to write Patreons, like all of these things. And my idea was like, I just want to interview the most successful creators that I can find, even if they're only slightly more successful than me, and just pick their brain. And it sort of grew from there into this idea of like what it means to really lead a creative life. What does it mean to be this complete creative human, to draw, to write, to make your art, and then sell your art? And they're really two different things. They're two pieces of the same person. And as you mentioned, the people that do this on the general are quite salesy. Even if they're not salesy inside their course, they're very salesy in their podcasts and such. And like there are all sorts of drivers of that like make that possible. There's all sorts of like urgency drivers and things in psychology that are the reasons why like people work the way that they like do that thing the way that they do it. And it's really funny to watch people like mature out of that phase and then, like sort of come down to earth and say, oh, maybe that's not a fun way to run your business. And that's really what I'm after personally. I'm after, how can this be fun for me? Like, how can I make money and have this be fun for me? And how can I make this last 40 years? Like, how can I keep doing projects for my whole life that are fulfilling and rewarding? And I don't think you can do that by being the hype salesman. I don't think you can do that by only being a writer either, or an artist, because then you're going to burn out. I have, and what it really became was this idea that so many of my friends burn out because they either have to have a job or they have to put it aside because someone said that like, oh, you're not making any money on this. Like we need this money to like sell, to like fix the roof or whatever the thing is. There were always these unforeseen circumstances that people, even full-time creative people, were not making the money that I thought they deserved. And it was about trying to find a way to make sales palatable for creative humans who literally don't care about the money. I fought this for so long that like there's no way that people don't care about the money, but the idea that you're putting your heart and soul into this work, that like the audience and the impact is important, but like the actual money that you're making is sort of a secondary factor. And being able to say, well, what if we could build your audience and build your impact, and then like the creative burn off of that, burn off of your career is money. Like it runs on money, but what you're actually worried about is building this audience and having an impact with them and developing your voice and all of these things. So I think that it started from me going to shows and wanting to interview all of these people, but knowing they would never sit down and just let me talk, buy them coffee, but they'll let me do a podcast. And like, so it really did, I think, grow organically from that moment. And then when I came back, I wanted to examine this idea of how do you actually put all of this together in a way that is sustainable for a 40-year career. And then there's one other thing that I should go back and say for the burnout. Like sometimes you will have said everything that you say about a topic. And that's how I felt about The Complete Creative as both a blog and as a podcast. Is I think it is an amazing encapsulation of 10 years of work. And I feel like as I was going through, it's like I'm saying the same thing again that I just said a month ago. And in many ways, that's what a blog is, just refreshing the same old content in a new way. But I just grew sick of that idea and saying, well, if I don't have anything new to say on this topic, obviously this will be, once you've written a lot on a topic, not a little, but sometimes you just wake up in the morning, you're like, I've got nothing. I've got nothing to say, or nothing to say in this way. I need to find a new way of saying it. And that often means going away and thinking about sort of what new you can say and what new to bring to the field, and then developing that piece. And maybe you come back in the same form or in a different form. A great story, like Ali Brosh did this book called Hyperbole and a Half. It's like my favorite webcomic of all time. She just vanished for 7 years off the face of the earth. Like no internet presence, no social media, no, her website was up, but there was like no new information. Like literally thought she was dead. At one point, her book got pushed to 2035. And then she came back. She had she had it all together. Whatever that 7-year gap was, like that's how long it took to find something new to say. And sometimes that's what it takes, is going away and saying, no, I really do have something to say on this topic, and letting the fire reignite in you. So the short answer to your question is it evolved over time.
Well, I appreciate your thought that you put through everything, and you're so right that like information can just get recycled, and you see people abuse that. And I think part of the longevity of your career is, and a lot of creatives' careers are, recognizing when you got to do something new, try something different. If you're trying something forever and it doesn't work, then move on. Like you don't have to keep trying the same thing. But I wanted to get into self-publishing with you, because my background started in self-publishing and then went to traditional publishing, and then I still do self-publishing. But through listening to your podcast and kind of getting into romance novels, like I listened to the last episode of your podcast with, was it Ellen?
Ella
Ella Bernard. Yeah. So I was listening to that and I was like, oh my gosh, I think a lot of the romance novels I've been reading are self-published. And then I flipped in the thing, and I could tell by the way that it was like written the publisher wise. I was like, this was self-published. And because you have your own publishing company, so unless you know what you're looking for, you wouldn't really know. But I've just been so impressed with that model, because I think that I would say 10, 15 years ago, like people didn't really understand self-publishing, but now with technology and building an audience, it's almost like you can bypass the whole system and say, why should I even go to a traditional publisher unless I need an advance?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't really ask you a question, but
You didn't. But I will say that I am not antagonistic to traditional publishers. Traditional publishers do one thing that you will never do as a self-published author. They get you into libraries and bookstores, and libraries and bookstores account for 85% of the overall market for books.
Yeah, librarians are like the mob bosses of publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're the unsung heroes, like bookstore owners, and I have friends who literally don't put their books on Amazon at all. Like they don't do ebooks at all. They just are published in bookstores and libraries. And when you think of the fact that 15% of sales are online sales and 85% still come from bookstores and libraries, that's a huge opportunity for publishing, for traditional publishing. However, the biggest publishers in the world publish somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 titles. I want to say it's 5,000 titles, and then there's 2,000 agents in the country, something like that. So like you're talking about 2,000 agents who are pushing, 100,000, 200, 300, maybe 500,000 authors for, a few thousand publishing spots. And your odds that A, and plus they are still repping Stephen King and David Baldacci and Michael Crichton and every big book that you see, and Judy Blume and Margaret Atwood. I feel like I had to put some women in there because I just named like 5
You went through all the master classes I just watched, so
yes, that's exactly where I got it, because that's what I did too. Yeah. So I like you have to compete against those same exact people, and so those agents are repping successful authors, and while they're looking, some of them are looking for new people. Like, you are going to be at the bottom of the food chain. You are going to. There's still I know a lot of lovely agents, and this is not. It's just the model is like, if you are an author, you have to then find an agent and then get a book deal, and that's a 6-month process to find an agent, assuming you even find an agent, and assuming that agent has your taste. Because the truth is that, like, I've submitted really successful books, self-published books, to agents, and they have rejected that book. And that's like, but the book is good. Like, I know the book. Like, I own a publishing company. I know the book is good. Like, I know, and I know I've taste from doing this for so long, but that doesn't stop them from rejecting the book. And so you're now stuck with a good book. You've written a good book that doesn't find an agent. And that doesn't, then even if it does find an agent, that agent will very rarely find you a publisher for that book. And it very rarely will find you a publisher who will give you a good advance for that book. And then if they give you a good advance even if they give you an advance for that book, they are going to give you 2 weeks, 2 years from now, to actually like promote your book. And so what do you do? Like, what do you do if you're an author and it's now between now and 2 years from now? If you got a book deal today, if you got an agent today, it'd be like at least a year to 2 years before you actually had a book. If you got an agent, a book deal today, it would be a year at least before they would put it out. And it'd probably be more like 18 to 24 months in order to get on the whole publishing cycle. Because there's a big publishing cycle when it comes to how these things are done for bookstores and libraries. So it's not impossible, but I know plenty of my friends who've been working on that same book with no agent for 10 years. And meanwhile, I've written over 20 novels, and plus graphic novels. And I've lapped them so many times, and like audience growth and just like people who buy my books and book sales and fun. And the fact that I've been doing this full time now for 5 years, it's the kind of thing that, like, there's nothing wrong with looking for an agent and looking for in the traditional way. But, it's a really hard row to hoe, and it's an even harder row to hoe if you want to make a real living at it. And it's a lot easier to go through all of the rigmarole that self-publishing is. And it is a lot of rigmarole. Like, it's a lot of effort. There's a lot of stuff you got to do in self-publishing, and a lot of it is annoying.
Yes.
Sure.
A lot of it is annoying. Like, so much of it is annoying, but it's still less annoying than having to put your fate in someone else's hands. However, I do believe that almost all the people that I know, even if they are traditionally published, are moving to at least be hybrid in some way or another.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, I believe in a hybrid career at this point, living in both worlds. I think they feed into each other, because I think that if you start off being self-published, then you kind of understand the hustle better of marketing than if you just go straight into getting a book deal, because you don't realize that most publishers don't really have a budget to support the selling of books, which doesn't make sense. You're like, why would you buy a book if you can't market it? But they usually put their money on like their best bet. So if you lead these authors be like, I just made a book, but they don't even like know how to market it. Versus like, if you've been doing it yourself, I almost had the opposite problem. I was like, do you not want me reaching out to people, to my publicist? Right. She's like, no, I'll do it all for you. I was like, I'm not really used to that.
Yes, it's and like, God forbid you have a deal and you don't earn out on that deal.
Yeah.
Because like, that's the worst case scenario, because then your literal career is over in that genre. I know so many authors who've gotten 3 book deals, didn't earn out, and now they literally can't get a book deal as like whatever cozy mystery, and they have to literally reinvent themselves as a new kind of author to get a book deal. Because once you have a 3-book deal and you haven't earned out on it, then all the publishers are like, oh, you just didn't have a name. There was no name associated with that. So, and like no one else will take a chance because they've already given you 3 books at a publisher.
Yeah.
And so in every way, I think that you should at least pursue a model that is somewhat centric in traditional, but also centric in self-publishing. I mean, I own a publishing company that publishes like works, so I have some affinity for traditional publishing, even though we go direct to consumer and don't go into bookstores and libraries. It's the kind of thing that I think what people are looking for is that validation that they are good. And I have talked to enough authors now to say that validation, many of them would rather have the validation that they are good than to actually have the book on the market.
Interesting. I don't know. I guess I don't know how I would feel that way. I guess I feel like if you're already putting your work out there, I guess it's different because I do comics. So it's a little bit more of a visual medium where you can kind of know if people are into it because of just social media and whatnot. But then when you're writing a novel, you know, you were talking about a different episode on your podcast about like working cons. And it is so much harder for somebody who's written in prose to like sell their book to be like, take a week of your life and read my book that you know nothing about versus like a graphic novel where people can like flip through it and then kind of see if it's their vibe or not. Sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought there, but
that's okay. Thank you for buying my book.
Oh, you're welcome. I read it too. Wait, let's go ahead and talk about your books. I don't want to like run out of time and have you not like be able to gush over your latest work. Actually, I see. Is that your new one that's coming out behind you? Is that the latest one? This is
volume 2.
Oh, that would be. Wait, you published this in 2011. So is that a big gap?
So I published. So this is the way that career works. Now that I've done 10 years, I think I can have some authority to say how a career works. Is that book started in 2011.
Okay.
It was originally published in that format in 15. And that's not even the normal. That's the original OG cover for the series too. Then in 2017, I relaunched it as a hardcover.
Oh.
That hardcover right there.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, I released the issue 5, and then we released the second volume, and we just finished the third volume. So that's 10 years to do 12 issues of comics. But yeah, it was a long gap, and there was a long gap because, frankly, Ichabod did not sell very well out of the gate. It was a moderate success for me. It was a huge success for me until my book Katrina Hates the Dead came along. And then I was like, oh, this is a bigger success. And then that was the biggest success until Monsters and Other Scary Shit came along, which was the biggest success until Cthulhu is Hard to Spell came along. And meanwhile, Ichabod never stopped finding an audience. It never stopped selling. It always had it. People kept talking to me about it for years and years, and it kept selling better and better every year. And this is something I talk to people about all the time, is that book should have been out of print damn near 7 times by now. It kept hanging on because I needed another book on my table. I was doing shows. And so I kept reprinting Ichabod, and I kept trying things with Ichabod because it was like a pretty good seller. But then once in 2017, just sales took off for Ichabod, and they kept growing and growing every year. Meanwhile, of all of my fans, the people talk the most about Ichabod, like they have always, like the chatter for Ichabod has always been the best. They say things like I love Katrina or I love Pixie Dust, but like they'd be like, Ichabod, what is going on? Like their tone change. And I always used it as a predictor of whether someone would like the rest of my books. I would say Katrina's my biggest hit. Ichabod is the book that if you like that book, you'll like everything else that I do for the rest of eternity, because it is so weird. And so the fact that it kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing over time allowed me to keep making more of it. And I never thought that 10 years later we'd now have 2 more volumes, because that book was done. That book was done in 2011. Actually, I think we ended production. But yeah, it's crazy how something can grow, and how it's crazy how sometimes society has to move in a way in order for a book to find its place, and things move in the zeitgeist and out of the zeitgeist. And sometimes you could look back at things and go, oh, I really don't like that the zeitgeist was good, like when this book was written. And then sometimes things move into the zeitgeist, and things like Legion and Nurse Ratched and all sorts of like crazy shows allowed Ichabod to become more and more and more popular over time, because more and more people found that kind of storytelling. So yeah, it's been a crazy ride to watch a book go from literally death, like dying, like literally death, to like one of our maybe my most successful book of all time.
Yeah. That should give all writers hope then, to hear that that you can bring something back from the dead, because that's your most rated book on Goodreads out of all of them, right?
Well, I think Sorry for Existing has like somewhere around 52, 50 or so, maybe 70.
67.
However, I gave like hundreds of thousands of copies away to that book.
Really? Like digitally? Is that how you could afford to
I've
do
given at least tens of thousands of copies of Sorry for Existing away for free to get those 70, 50 or so reviews. Ichabod, aside from issue 1 that I give away for free, I never give that book away for free. Sometimes I'll do bundle deals and stuff, but like that 50 reviews is like earned by people actually buying the book, as opposed to just like doing a free giveaway on BookBub or something like that, which it has its value. But I have a lot of issues with how the review system works for books, and how my books that are the most popular somehow have less reviews than books that are just cheaper.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. A lot of people also like give you the bad reviews are just angry people. You're like, you should stop reading my books then.
Yes.
Don't bring the number down.
I have a series called called The Gods vs. Chronicles, which is Katrina Hates the Dead, Pixie Dust, my 2 graphic novels, and then 4 novels with 3 more coming. And the first book the first 4 books have like 3 stories in each. They're like 3 shorter novels that I collected into, and then I took the shorter novels down. But the first one is called And Demons Follow Behind Her, which was it's like my freebie. And it's like a post-apocalyptic satire on Left Behind. And religious people keep finding that book somehow. I don't know how they keep finding it, and then telling me, and then leaving reviews that like it is apocryphal, or like that the thing doesn't like say what it actually is inside of it. And so yeah, I find much more value in the 5-star reviews, because it tells me how many people actually like the book. And look, it's not it's tough to say that and not sound like you're like, oh, well, you just don't want to hear like the bad reviews that people are saying. But I am releasing a book called How Not to Invade Earth, which is done with my art style, which is here's a book that I drew. Like we're not talking about like Jim Lee style art, but like hundreds of people have bought that book over my artwork over the years. And I think like 130 or so people have bought that Kickstarter book already, because like there's an audience, like those people like the book.
Yeah. And
some of my books get, have like 1,000 plus sales when they launch. And a lot of my books have sold thousands upon thousands of copies. And often now like $30, like full price $30, like hardcover book, because I don't do a lot of paperback books. But you can find an audience for anything, is my point. It's like you could find an audience. The key is how you're looking for them, and how big is your audience overall. Like it just showed you my art. there's not a huge audience for it.
Oh, I think I'm part of like the small press expo crew. I think you totally have, like I almost feel like when people's art style it's uniquely themselves, then it's a lot more attractive than somebody who's just trying to recreate like manga over and over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. But I would say that the ceiling for certain genres are different.
Mm-hmm.
So like certain art styles, they're just more people exist that are already fans of that art style. Mm-hmm. And then there are ones that, or books, for instance, I write mythological fantasy books. They ain't romance and they ain't thriller, which means like it is far drop down the most popular categories.
So is it like character driven fantasy then?
So it's character driven fantasy, but it's fantasy with gods and monsters and like mythological creatures and everything in it. So it's not urban fantasy. It's not like space fantasy. It's not epic fantasy. It's kind of all of them in one, and it goes across a big spectrum of all genres of fantasy. And the people that find it and like it love it. Mm-hmm. But they're just a smaller pool of them than there are of romance and thriller readers. And so it's harder to find those people, and then it's harder to service those people because there's just fewer of them. And so if people fall out, there are just less to replace them. So that's part for me about like about understanding like this book that I just launched, which is like 140 people, let's say, backed it, I think, at this point. Well, earlier 2 months ago, I did a book, the Ichabod Volume 2. It had over 600 people. Then I did 2 novel campaigns that had about 250 people. And then I had an anthology that had 757 people that backed it this year. And this is all this year. And so even in my own audience, there's a hunger for different kinds of work that are different depending on what it is. And we've been talking sort of around this for a little bit while, but it's a really important fact that different things are going to be different levels of popular in your own career. And you have to be okay with the fact that, hey, this is going to sell way less than your hit book. It's just going to, like, if you take, it's a fifth. How Not to Invade Earth sells a fifth as well as my best-selling book this year on Kickstarter alone, because we don't have shows. I don't have that much other data, but like still enough to be a hit. If you're focused on finding the audience for that book, for your work, your unique voice, and you're focusing less on the 1-star reviews, even though they still hurt, and focus more on like growing the base of the 5-star reviews and like making sure that it's something and that your books are getting better for those people. It's going to be much easier to keep going. Yeah. It's a lot easier when like your floor is 150 backers and like $3,000 than back when my max was like $5,000 and I really couldn't launch anything else, because it gives you some freedom. It gives you some level of freedom that like, okay, I'm not saying I'm going to start drawing my own books again, but I know like at what level I can expect success to be at. And then I can design a book that costs that much to make and be like, okay, I had to stay within these constraints. I know roughly how many people are going to buy my novels. Then you can grow it over time, but you have to know that number and know that a book can always find a new audience. There's always more people, even a really tiny genre. Like there are still millions of people that like that genre.
But you got to find the people. I think that's what's so hard. The people, like to make that connection of how do you find the people?
Well, it's tough to say one at a time, but
it's kind of true though.
A lot of times it's one at a, but see, here's the thing is a lot of people, if you found one new fan a day somehow, and for a year, you would have 365 people buying your book. If you, over 3 years, that's 1,000 people. That's probably roughly what I used to do. Like that's probably what I roughly found. Like roughly, I did shows, and my goal would be to find like 50 people or 100 people to buy the books. And like when you amortize that across like the days, I probably found roughly like one, maybe 2 or 3 people to buy that book a day. The problem is that once people find that person, they do not hold on to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Or they like follow me on social media, which is terrible. Like you need to have a way for people to connect with you where they can actually buy your work and not have it algorithmed away. That means no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, or like those are ancillary things, but you have to have a capture device so you can keep those people, because when you get them the first time, like that's just breaking even on your costs. Your acquisition cost is like that's hard. What becomes easier is if the pool grows every time of people who will buy your next book, people who'll try your weird thing, people who will do this, who buy pins, or like, and you're not making everything for each person. You know, I have this pin from our new for a new series, and like it's adorable. It's not all of my fans' cup of tea, but like it's some people's cup of tea. As you can see from behind me, all of these were painted by me.
Yeah,
and like.
Awesome.
It's got a certain aesthetic that some people like. Not everyone, certainly not the majority of my fan base. But within that fan base, there are people that still pay me, that pay me for commissions and buy the work that I draw. And that is because I develop a relationship with them. It's not that they're just blindly being like, oh, like Russell put out book by book. What they're saying is like, I have bought Russell's work. I know what he stands for, and I will try this thing, even though it is not in my preferred genre often, or sometimes maybe it is in their exact preferred genre. Maybe they would rather me start. These people would rather me keep drawing my own books. But what they're saying is I'll at least give it a shot because it's Russell, and I believe that he is going to deliver an experience that I will enjoy just like the other experiences that I enjoy. And I actually don't think it's that hard to build an audience. I know because I've done it for dozens of authors. I've helped them. I have courses and all sorts of stuff. What's hard is doing the work of keeping them and understanding that some will fall off and you won't get the open rates that you want all of the time. And that's not a game of every day. Like you can't look at your audience on a day-to-day and who is opening your emails or who is liking you on social media. You can use those as like, oh, these are metrics that Twitter's not doing so good. Instagram's not doing that great this month. My open rates are down, and then improve. But what you're doing is you're creating an audience in aggregate who allows you into their life. And you occupy a space inside of them. Small space, like not as big as their family or their friends or their dogs or even like some of the media that they probably love more than your work. But like you've got a spot. When they buy your book, or even when they download the book, they've got a little ember. And your job is to say, you have a little ember. Like, come join my mailing list. Come see what I'm about. Here's a couple of other books that I've already made. Let's see if you like them. Here's a wider range of the stuff that I do. Here's some books that I draw. Here's some things that here's a novel that I wrote. Here's a couple of comics that I've made. Here's sort of the range you're getting into when you come onto the Russell Nohelty train. And not everything's going to be your cup of tea, or maybe everything will be. I would love it if everything was your cup of tea and you just bought everything that I put out, because I put out a lot of stuff, but I certainly don't intend it. I kind of have three main things. I put out graphic novels that I create, usually paired with an artist, but sometimes I draw myself. I do novels, generally fantasy or sci-fi and fantasy that are like very high, intense thriller with some comedy. And I do anthologies. Those are the 3 tracks kind of that like you will get into. And you can only like one of those tracks. Like, I don't care. Like, you can like all of them. I will eventually get to all of these things. And like the ones that are more popular, are going to get serviced more. And the ones that are less popular are going to get serviced less. And the ones that I love more are going to get serviced more. And when you can get something that I love a lot and makes me money, then I'm going to devote all of my time to that. And like, I think that people, I'll give you an example. My friend is putting out a new webcomic through Webtoon. And he just emailed today and said, I have a new webcomic that's coming out to Webtoon. And as I always do whenever he sends an email, which is like once or twice a year, I say, are you going to send me an email every week to tell me that there's a new episode so I don't fall 20 episodes behind like I did last time? And of course he's not going to do that because that's not his style. But that is the kind of thing that I would expect. Luckily, I'm friends with him. So like, I really don't care if I get the thing, but like a lot of people want to hear from you. They're on your list to get to know you, to learn the things that make you tick, so that when you say, here's something you should check out, that they actually check it out. And I think that we treat this audience like this behemoth, this Leviathan, and this, well, I guess I'll say Ziz because that's the third one. But they are, but it's not quite so scary as all of that. What it is you making a connection with the person, and you're trying to keep that ember alive. And I am constantly surprised at how few people reply to my emails, but then go buy all of my books. Like every time I have a Kickstarter, there'll be people that I haven't talked to for years, maybe ever, that buy the book. I've never heard from them in my email. I've never seen them on social media. In fact, often those people from social media like never buy my books ever. I've never seen them back a book ever, even though I converse with them all of the time. And that doesn't bother me. Either one. It doesn't matter to me. Like whether you are buying all of my books and never talking to me all the time and buying my books, or never talking to me and buying my books. The important thing is my goal is to say, how can I build this connection deep? And when I launch a book, my job is to say, hey, I'm making an assumption you're on this list because you want to be here, because you like me, because you want to hear about my projects, because that's what I'm doing, talking about my projects. I'll talk about other stuff, but I'm mostly talking about my projects. And here's how I'm going to massage this project to show you why it's important to me and why I think you will like it.
That's so true. Well, I have 2 questions left for you. And thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know we've gone a little longer than I've requested. That's
okay. Okay. I'm perfectly happy to answer as many questions as you got.
Thank you. Well, here's the deal. When I think about self-publishing, I even watched a documentary on it. I feel like romance is so hot right now. So how come you're not getting into the romance thing? I know because you're not in it for the money, but isn't there just like a little bit of a lure to go into the romance? Because I feel like they make so much freaking money, or it sounds like it.
I know plenty of romance authors who make no money.
Damn.
And I know some romance authors who make tons of money. And the same thing with crime, and the same thing with fantasy, but less so. Very few horror, some and sci-fi, and sci-fi is sort of like becoming a pretty big behemoth with certain things like military sci-fi. And here's the thing with self-publishing. Like, you have to be in a few genres to really hit it big.
What do you mean?
Like, you know, if you were in military sci-fi, you have the chance to hit it real big. If you are in like thriller or most romance categories, you have the chance to hit it big. But most people do not have the desire to write those kinds of books. They have the desire to write whatever weird books they want to. And there are 2 ways, I believe, to make an author career. One is disappear into the genre, like to the place where you hit every trope and you are so good that they can't tell you from the best romance writers in the world. These are pulp novelists. This is the careers of pulp novelists. They usually would write like 200 books in their career.
I have a whole thing on it.
Yeah. And their thing is just like I'm going to write the same formula for 200 books. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. Like, this is not like, I have friends who love that work. And then there are people like Neil Gaiman who decide they want to stake a claim and they're going to subvert tropes in a very specific way, their way, and then they are going to pull people to them. And I have never been interested in disappearing into my work. I very much want my work to be like, I want when I'm dead for 100 years that people read a book and are like, I know exactly, like I can pick that person's voice out. Like it feels like a Russell Nohelty book, and it's a lot harder to do it that way. And I do think you can put certain things. So I much more have much stronger romance ties now than I did when I first started, for instance. Just because like I'm trying to move more towards the mainstream. But that's all the career is. All your career is moving to the is moving more to like where you think your tastes and your audience tastes are, and where you can try and pick up new audience members. And so, I mean, I don't have a draw to do straight romance. I have written some mystery before, and I do have some draw to do paranormal cozy mysteries because I love them so much. Like they're like one of my favorite guilty pleasures is like is reading some paranormal cozy mystery books, and just like they're very cozy, and I always feel good after I read them. And so I think maybe I'll do something like that in the future. But to know that like really, if there's not a romance or a thriller aspect to your book, even if it's a fantasy, even if it's a horror, like it's going to be a harder sell. Like those things make people want to read your book more. So I think that it behooves you to find ways to incorporate those things into your work. But writing a book is hard. Drawing a book is real hard. I mean, yeah. Like making something is so hard, and you put so much of your life into it that I've got to make the thing that I want to make. I've been very lucky in my career to be able to make the thing that I want to make and somehow have an audience for it. And I have seen that like a lot of my friends get stuck in a trope. A lot of my friends get stuck in like a thing that they just don't necessarily want to be writing, or like I could get a job at any day. I could go get a sales job, like at any company, like I could go sell anything and like make way more money than I make in publishing. So I always know that. And I know that my goal is to make the kinds of things that I want to make. That's the career that I want to have. Mm-hmm. I want a career that I can wake up and say, I think I want to draw a book and then launch it. And like, I know it's not going to be that successful, but I can do that. Mm-hmm. I have the tools to do that. And I also, on top of that, like I hate how Amazon's dashboard is. Like,
I haven't seen it, but I feel like in a lot of your interviews, everybody talks about Amazon.
Yeah, it's tough because it just makes people feel like a number. Like all I'm doing is like selling a widget. Mm. Like, I mean, not to be the artist, but like I feel like I'm making more than a widget. I feel that the amount of effort that gets put forth to create a book, like is magical and special. And I'm sure everyone feels that about their products, but I really feel that way about books. And I don't like looking at my Kindle dashboard. I very much like going out and meeting people and doing Kickstarter and knowing my audience and being able to shake their hand theoretically in the future and in the past, and be able to email them and know what they like and what they don't like. And I'm not saying you don't get that with Amazon, but I like being able to go to a Kickstarter or go through my sales on my website and be like, I know 85% of these people, and like they've made this many sales with this person. Mm-hmm. And after then, like going into the data and seeing who backed all 5 of our Kickstarters this year. And when you do that, like you can make a career doing anything. Like there's 1,000 people that like anything. Yeah. If you can put out enough product to satisfy 1,000 people, you have a career. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm done. I'm just rambling at this point.
I like hearing you go on because you have so much knowledge to share. But I think a key piece that, and everything that you're saying that I think we really need to emphasize is that you feed the beast. Like, you're putting out new content consistently. And the thing that I hear, repeated, especially going through your podcast, don't you hate it that, like, I'm like, your podcast, and you're like, but I ended it.
No, I love
but it's so good.
It's great. It's lovely.
It's the fact that it's true in traditional publishing, like so many authors, we just, you just put out like a book maybe every 2 years if you're lucky, because it takes the time to make it, go back and forth with the publisher, and then also if you get to sell it or not. But with the, the self-publishing, like, you are just giving the audience like what they want more and more and more. I don't think people put that together when they're trying to start out their career. Is that something you emphasize when you do your like mentorships or your courses?
It's hard at the beginning to have this kind of productivity. Like, I put out 11 books this year. And,
Damn. 11 good books though? Like, that's what I'm wondering. Okay.
Oh, well, I've written 7 really great books this year. I'm going to finish an 8th really great book before the end. Yeah. I put out 11 really great books. It's very hard to get that level of productivity. Like, when I started, it took a year to write a book, and then it got down to 6 months. And then I met an author, a romance author, actually, named her name's Nohelty, and she literally changed my life. She changed my life when she showed me her sales dashboard. I was not anywhere. I definitely did not think that like you could make that much money self-publishing back when I met her. And then she said, "Oh yeah, and I usually write like a lot." She was very productive and very prolific, and I was like, "Well," and then I looked at her like, and then I read her books, and I was like, "These are good books. They're a little steamy for me," so I would skip through the sex scenes, but
clutch your pearls.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of writing about that stuff. I don't like reading about it. I just like, I'm not like, it's fine. It's out there. But like, they were like really well constructed books, and like she had a lot of them. And I've now know so many authors who put out a lot of material, and some of it is formulaic, but all of it is really good. Like, it's really good stuff, and it's possible to write a book in a month. It really is possible, but I don't emphasize those things because the most important thing is step 1 is making something that's great. Like, you have to be confident that the thing, even if it takes you 2 years, that the thing that you're making is amazing. And once you can make an amazing thing, and this is another thing, a lot of people work in genres that are not conducive to writing fast. So I'll give you an example. I wrote a book called Anna in the Dark Place. It's a really dark book. It's about a girl whose best friend dies of cancer and comes back as a ghost to help her mend a rift between the living and the dead. But like, there's a secret. Like, the main character Anna was in love with her best friend. It was a girl, and what she finds out when the girl comes back is that the girl loved her too. Like, they never told each other. And so it's this like sort of love story, but also as they're fixing this rift, she starts to realize that when like she fixes this thing, like her friend, the love of her life, is got to go. And so the closer she gets to solving this thing, the closer she gets to losing the thing she loved most in the world. And like, that's not the kind of book you can write fast. You can't write a thing like that every month. There's certain things. That's why a lot of romance has a happily ever after. Romance is a happily ever after at the end. So like, you can always, no matter how dark it gets, there's always a bright at the end of it. And so there's a lot of genres. There's a lot of kinds of work that you just can't go fast on. You're never going to draw 5 pages of Alex Ross pencils in a day. Just never going to do it. Just never going to do it. It's like, it's impossible to have that level of detail in the time that like So you have to make concessions and things. And if you really want to make your living doing fine art or Alex Ross level art, you have to understand that like you can only do so much. So you must then charge much more for it because you can do so much less of it. So there's no one way. I try not to emphasize anything when I'm doing, except these are the principles that you should learn. And these are the things that you should do, because the more that I tell you, this is the way to do it. Write a book a month. If I told you the only way to be successful as an independent creator was write a book a month, like, would you sign up for that?
I think I'd write 12 crappy books.
Right. Or you'd write, or you just burn out. Like it's a muscle. You know, I have now, after 10 years of writing books, I have a muscle that allows me to write a book in a month. Like, it knows I can write 5,000 words in a day. I can do this in two. Like, it's done it. So not only am I testing it, but I'm actually writing that stuff. I'm writing that fast. And if I stopped doing that, I probably couldn't get back there very easily. So, and also it's a thing that I want to do. One of the reasons that I cut out the complete creative is because the thing I want to do is write books. And everything that allowed me to write more books or do more comics or launch more books, like I ran towards that when everything shut down, when like I wasn't able to make money doing a lot of the things that I used to make money doing. I started running to the things that I really loved instead. And that's when I really learned that like the thing that I want to do is just the thing that fills me up is the writing of the books and then launching those books. And that whole process, like it really jazzes me up. But for years, last year, I released one book. 2 years ago, I released one book. The year before that, I released 2 books. And I was doing shows to supplement my income. And, 2017, I made over $100,000. 2018, I made over $100,000. 2019, I made over $100,000. And yes, that was not just doing books. That was doing courses and other things and like doing book marketing for people. But that 2017 year, I was just writing. I wrote those 2 books and did shows, and I still made over $120,000 that year. And that's revenue also. I should claim, like, I'm not claiming that I netted that amount of money, but like that is how much revenue I made. And I released 2 books. One of them raised $27,000. One of them raised $25,000. And then I had other forms of income that I did do other things with. But yeah, I like that's very different than releasing than writing a book a month. Like, it's so much different that, and then 2017, I started this challenge for writing 18 books in 18 months. But those books were about 25 to 30,000 words. That's all I could get to in a month. But by the end of that, I was able to write like a 60,000 word book. I pushed myself and I wrote a 60,000 word book in a month. And now I've written 8 of those length or 60 to 90,000 word books over the course of this year. And it took me literally like half a decade to figure that out. But before I did that, I was releasing 1 to 2 books a year. And that also gave me a career. I just had to supplement it with conventions and some course sales and teaching and other sorts of things that I was doing. I own a Verizon dealership too, so some money from there. And now I'm doing it mostly by writing. And yes, if you want to write full time and not do shows and not do any of those other things, like, you're going to have to put out a lot of books. But there's no one way to have a creative career. There are as many ways as there are writers, and I even know writers who are 100% making online sales who are writing 1 book a year. I know ones that are writing 12 books a year. I know ones like my friend Ella, who's putting out a book every 2 weeks.
Yeah, crazy.
And I don't think I know writers who have mostly traditionally published and they put out 1-2 books a year maybe, and they're still making a living. I just know there's no one way. Artists, they can draw other people's books as well as their own books. Mm-hmm. So there's just so many things to do that I would tell you. I'm very good. Hopefully, I'm very good, especially on my blog, of breaking down what I think the most successful path is to this thing, given the data. But I am an outlier from that data. I have been successful from the first book that I really put out into the world. Like, I've been full time on this road since 2015, when I put out my first collection of books. So I mean, that's very uncommon, and I did it in a very uncommon way through Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter, a comic, through a children's book called The Little Bird and the Little Worm, through a mystery novel called Gumshoe. So my stuff is all over the place. Like, it's always been this like poo-poo's platter of like genre and theme and actually not theme, but genre and like format, and all of these things kind of have combined to make this thing. And one of the things that I think is the great benefit of my career is, like, when someone says that there is this way, this is the way to do it, I say, I don't know, man. Like, that is not how I did it, and I bet I made more money than you last year.
No,
like,
you do
I'm not
not
saying
say
that. I'm not saying that that's a good. That's like not that money is the only equalizer for this
Yeah.
thing, but like, if you are telling me that the only way to do it is to do it this way, I am here to tell you that, like, I have done it other ways successfully for years, and it is not better or worse. It's harder in a different way. You know, doing 20 or 30 shows is harder in a different way than doing writing 11 books or 12 books in the year. But it's still hard. It's hard in a way that like that is more physically grueling than mentally grueling. But like, they're both equally hard, just in different ways. And there are people that make their living on doing sexy things on Patreon. There are people that like make it doing fine art. There are people that have their books on Webtoon and then fund it all through Kickstarter and make like $500,000, like Ava's Demon. There's just no right way. And so I think that it's important to understand the principles of what make a successful career. But I certainly don't think that I've ever met two people that had the same career and made it in the same way.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true and beautiful. And let me apologize for my cat meowing.
Oh, it's fine. Like, I know it's Zoom. It's 2020. Zoom. 2020 energy is very cat friendly.
She's become very needy. She's 18, so I'm like, I guess I should savor every moment with her.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really great point to end on, because it is true. Like, there's no right or wrong path to it. But with I guess the last thing that I'd love for you to share is, with the pandemic and everything and you not being able to go to cons, like, what's the best way for people to support you right now and to help your career keep going?
Sure. So, the best way is,
Give me all your money.
To join the mailing list at russellnohelty.com, and you'll get a bunch of free books, and you'll hear when we do new launches. The way I make most of my money is through Kickstarter launches and then online sales. I really appreciate how people have helped us raise over $70,000 on Kickstarter this year across the 5 projects that we've done. I do both novels and comics. And sometimes I do novels based on the comics that I made. And sometimes I do comics based on the novels that I've made. And so it's kind of like this interesting, it's this interesting kind of mix, especially if you like fantasy and sci-fi, because like sometimes I'll put out an absurdist comedy that I drew, and sometimes I'll put out these novels that are like fantasy thrillers, and sometimes I'll put out like back catalog stuff. And sometimes I'll put out a graphic novel, and sometimes I'll put out an anthology. And over all of those things, like, you'll probably find something you like especially if you take the time to actually not just download this stuff, but read it. But yeah, I'm mostly interested in connection. In fact, I judge my career, or a successful week, really based on how many quality connections I've made in that week, and how many people that I've reached out to and had the chance to communicate with. It could be people that I already know. It could be people like yourself who are just talking for the first time. But like, I think that the real way to build a career still is one person at a time, and then keep up that communication as much as possible. So I'm always looking to hear from people. I always appreciate when people, tell me that they like my work, back my books, and join the conversation, because I am very interested in having that conversation. It's become sort of the driving force of the last couple of years of my life. And as I move further and further away from doing book marketing for other people, and doing courses and doing podcasts and doing all of that stuff, and I focus more on writing, I am very excited to have more people, especially read my novels. Um, it's not that I don't love my comics. I do love my comics. They're my babies. They're the way. They're the reason to have a career. But the novels are new. It's a new thing that I just started really releasing and talking about last year. I've written a lot, but I really started releasing them. Actually, I guess last year and then the beginning of this year. And so I'm really interested to start having people talk about them more and do more in that side of my life.
Cool. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Russell, for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. And I learned a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.